In his teaching on man, created in the image of God, we'll read in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, of all visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his Creator. He is the only creature on earth that God has willed for his own sake, and he alone is called to share by knowledge and love in God's own life. It was for this end that he was created, and this is the fundamental reason for his dignity. Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 356. What we read in the Catechism shows that man is special and set apart from other creatures. He is special because God bestows on him a dignity which no other creature has. He is created in the image of God. The Catechism further says that being in the image of God, the human individual possesses the dignity of a person who is not just something, but someone. He is capable of self-knowledge, of self-possession, and of freely giving himself and entering into communion with other persons. And he is called by grace to a covenant with his Creator, to offer him a response of faith and love that no other creature can give in his stead. Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 357. This special privilege that God gives to the human person is evident in the manner in which man was created in the creation narrative in the book of Genesis. In creating every other thing, God simply said, "Let there be." Whereas in creating man, he said, "Let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Thus, God created man with special capacity. The image character gives him the capacity to know and love, that is, to understand and judge. It is because of this that man is given dominion over all that God created. He was, however, not given reckless dominion. Rather, the mandate was to exercise responsible stewardship. The exercise of his God-given capacity means that man should not be like other creatures. He must act according to right reason. The proper use of his intellect must guide the choice of his will. This means that man must always act right in conformity to the will of God. But because he is created with innate freedom, It is also possible that man makes bad choices, even though the reason God created him with free will is so that he may make right choices according to God's will for him. However, because there is also the possibility of reckless use of his free will, it is not everything that man has capacity for doing that is pleasing to God and that is according to God's will. The readings of today's liturgy help us to draw some lessons on man's capacity for good and for evil. In the background to today's passage of the first book of Samuel, it is noted that the prophet Samuel, on the instruction of God, anointed David to be the second king of Israel. Saul, the first king, because he had displeased God, was to lose his kingship. His throne was to pass not to his son, but to David, an unknown stranger from the village of Bethlehem. When Saul heard this, he was moved by anger and jealousy. And his one desire was to eliminate the rival. David fled from the court of Saul, and followed by some 400 relatives and supporters, took refuge in the mountains of southern Judea. Saul set out with 3,000 chosen warriors to search for him. Today's passage of the first reading describes for us an event that occurred during this search. It is one of the most touching examples ever described of reverence for an anointed king, mercy for an unjust persecutor, and pity for a good man blinded by jealousy and anger. It happened in the days when an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a life for a life were the order of the day. See, Paul lay helpless in the cave, Saul lay helpless in the cave with his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. It was in the power of David. David had the capacity to put an end to Saul's life. Instead, David took the spear to prove he had been in Saul's tent and could have killed him had his respect for God not prevented him. By this act, David shows us that it is not everything that is in our capacity to do that conforms to God's will. In ordinary human thinking, it will seem that God had finally put his enemy into his hands. But David saw in this incident a test of his own justice and his reverence for God's anointed. He had the capacity to put an end to Saul's life there and there, but he did not. How many of us Christians can act in this way when we have the capacity to take out our enemies before they do take us out? In the gospel passage of today, Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to those who you badly. To the man who slaps you on one cheek, present the other cheek too. To the man who takes your cloak from you, do not refuse your tunic. Luke chapter 6, verse 27 to verse 29. These are not just empty words or impracticable teaching, because our leader and master, Jesus Christ, while dying in agony on the cross, begged his Father to forgive the very men who had nailed him to that cross. He had the capacity to destroy those who nailed him to the cross, but that would be contrary to his Father's will. David also had the capacity to put an end to Saul's life, but he knew that that would be an offense against God. How many of us will act today toward an enemy as David acted? David's restraint is an example that can and should put many Christians to shame. Why? Because unlike David, many of us Christians would, contrary to the injunctions of the Lord, exercise our capacity to hate our enemies, to do evil to those who hate us, to curse those who curse us, to treat badly those who treat us badly, to retaliate even with greater intensity if anyone struck us on one cheek, and to take back even in greater measure if anyone stole anything from us. Not only does Jesus teach us that such exercise of our capacity is contrary to the will of God, but also David's restraint against Saul puts us Christians to shame if we exercise our capacity in such manner. The sad fact is that only a few Christians will show the magnanimity, the bigness of soul that David showed on that occasion. Yet, the message of the Lord is clear. Love your enemies. It would at first sight appear that the demands that Christ makes on our charity are anything but easy. Loving one's enemies is asking a lot. Blessing them and praying for them might be all right for St. Francis, but expecting it of us seems to be going very far. However, Jesus does not expect us to exercise this capacity by our human powers. It is by the grace of God that we will be able to do these extraordinary things. Let us, therefore, open ourselves to receiving God's grace in our relations and in the exercise of our capacity to do anything. Laudetur Jesus Christus, nunc et in aeternum.